Wondery Plus subscribers can binge new seasons of American Scandal early and ad-free right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. It's August 22nd, 1989 in Charlotte, North Carolina. Jim Bakker is sitting in the backseat of a black sedan, staring silently out the window as he heads to the city's federal courthouse. He pushes up his glasses and dabs at his damp face. He still can't believe this is happening. For more than a decade, he and his wife, Tammy Faye, were like the king and queen of Christian media. They built an empire that oversaw 2,500 employees, a theme park, and a satellite TV network that beamed into 14 million homes in the U.S. and 40 countries abroad. But now people are calling him a criminal, all because he couldn't provide as many hotel rooms at his Christian resort as promised. To Bakker, the whole thing feels ridiculous, but the consequences could not be more serious. If convicted, he could get 120 years in federal prison. Bakker tries to picture a narrow, cold cell, rust-flecked prison bars, some beefy, tattooed, leering cellmate. He shudders. Bakker then leans forward in his seat. George, can we talk for a minute? Bakker's lead attorney, George Davis, turns from the passenger seat and squints at him through a pair of thick bifocals. Yeah, sure, Jim. There's no chance that I'll actually get a life sentence for this, right? Well, I wouldn't say there's no chance, but it doesn't make any sense. I've done nothing wrong. All I did was make promises that haven't come true yet. That's what dreamers do. Then God takes those dreams and turns them into reality. Well, Jim, that might be so, but it's not God we have to convince, it's the jury. Well, that's where you come in, right? You'll make the jury see that I'm innocent. I'm going to do my best, but look, Jim, I've said all along that this won't be easy. The prosecution is sure to come out swinging. They're going to say you defrauded your followers, that you told them their donations would guarantee them rooms in your hotels, even though you knew you didn't actually have enough rooms to accommodate them all. But that's not right. I was going to have all the rooms ready eventually. Look, eventually is not going to cut it with the federal government. But still, don't worry. If our defense strategy works, the detail about the rooms won't even matter. We're going to argue that you're running a church, not a hotel. And when people give money to a church, they don't expect anything in return. That's right. Our followers love us. They make their donations freely, with an open heart. The rooms were really just our way of thanking them. Exactly. Now just straighten up that tie and get ready. We're pulling into the courthouse. Bakker emerges from the sedan into a crowd of people, held back by stone-faced policemen. And as he climbs the concrete courthouse steps, Bakker thinks of Moses crossing the parted Red Sea. Cameras flash and click all around him. Some of the bystanders hold posters with Bakker's grinning face on them. Others thrust pens at him, asking for an autograph. One woman cries out that God will protect him, just as a man in the crowd screams that Bakker will burn in hell. And when Bakker reaches the top of the courthouse steps, a reporter steps out with a microphone asking for comment. Bakker looks back at the surging throng of supporters and enemies, and then up at the cloud-streaked sky. He keeps his gaze upward for a moment, then lowers his head, leans into the microphone, and loudly declares his faith in God. And with that, Bakker turns and walks into the courthouse. He's determined to win this case and convince the world that he's not a fraud, not a thief, but merely a humble, honest man, guilty of nothing more than a desire to spread Christ's love and light throughout the world. American Scandal is sponsored by Dell Technologies. Seasons change, so why not your tech? Upgrade now during the Dell Technologies Summer Sale event and save on select PCs like the XPS 16, powered by Intel Core processors. You'll be able to bring your most intensive projects to life with built-in AI, minimalistic design, immersive visuals, and cinematic audio. And when you shop online at Dell.com/deals, you'll have access to exceptional tech and electronics, plus free shipping on everything. Amazing prices await you for a limited time only at Dell.com/deals. That's Dell.com/deals. American Scandal is sponsored by Audible. Shh, listen. You hear that? That noise? Now, of course, there is no noise, but I bet you started to imagine what the noise could be, because listening goes hand in hand with imagining. That's why Audible is such a great place to let your imagination soar. When you listen, you can be inspired to imagine new worlds, new possibilities, new ways of thinking. There's more to imagine when you listen. A great listen that got my imagination going was David Grann's newest, The Wager, a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder. As an Audible member, you choose one title a month to keep from their entire catalog, and new members can try Audible free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/AS or text AS to 500-500. From Wondery, I'm Lindsay Graham, and this is American Scandal. In the 1980s, Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker were two of the most famous religious leaders in America. They launched an evangelical TV network, hosted their own shows, and created a Christian resort and theme park that was visited by 6 million people a year at its peak. The Bakkers built an empire and financed it all through donations from their viewers. But those viewers had no idea that some of their donations were actually being used for other insidious purposes that had nothing to do with the couple's religious work. Quietly, Jim Bakker had gotten himself into some serious trouble with the FCC and the IRS. And then a young church secretary claimed Bakker sexually assaulted her and used church resources to cover up the crime. By 1989, Bakker stood accused of defrauding his followers of more than $150 million and using that money to fund his and Tammy Faye's over-the-top lifestyle. When the media and federal prosecutors exposed the Bakkers' transgressions, their downfall was swift. The Bakkers and their company PTL became uniquely American symbols of greed, religious hypocrisy, and celebrity gone awry. This is episode 1 in our series on Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, Faith, Not Fact. It's winter 1960 on the campus of North Central Bible College in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a Christian school affiliated with the Assemblies of God Church. And 18-year-old Tammy Faye LaValle is walking across the quad, hugging her wool coat up around her ears to shield her from the frosty air. At 4'10" and 73 pounds, Tammy is almost always cold, so she generally avoids taking long walks on snowy nights like this one. But when Jim Bakker asked if she'd go out on a date with him, she couldn't refuse. Tammy turns a soft smile towards Jim, who walks by her side. He's 20 years old, handsome, well-dressed and self-confident, with warm brown eyes and dark hair combed into a perfect ducktail. And so far tonight, he's also been a perfect gentleman. Instead of taking her to some usual date spot, Jim brought her to one of his favorite local churches and listened attentively as the minister shared the word of the Lord. But now, as they walk back towards her dorm, Tammy is very aware of the fact that the two of them are alone. And in her experience, this is when boys tend to drop the gentleman act. Tammy hopes that Jim won't try to put the moves on her. She really likes him, but before this relationship can go any further, she has to make sure that their morals and beliefs are in alignment. So she's keeping the conversation formal and the distance between them an arm's length. What did you think of tonight's sermon, Jim? Oh, it was great. You look a little cold, Tammy. You be warmer over here. No, I'm fine right here. Well, all right, if that's what you want. What I really want is to know a little bit more about you. Well, I've pretty much told you everything, haven't I? I'm from Muskegon, Michigan. I'm a sophomore. I don't have a car yet, but I'm saving up for one. I like Elvis Presley records, and I like you. What else is there? No, I'm not talking about that stuff. I want to know why you're here. Why Bible college? What made you decide to walk with the Lord? Well, that's quite a long story, and it is getting late. Maybe best to save it for another night. I'd like to hear it now, if that's all right. It's important to me. Well, since it's important to you. Jim pauses and lowers his eyes. He suddenly seems shy, like he's reluctant to share this story. But then when he begins speaking, his air of quiet confidence returns. Well, I guess it was 2 years ago. Back then, I went to church on Sundays, but, just because my father made me. I didn't really feel it in my heart yet. But one night, after a Sunday evening service, I'm cruising in my father's 52 Cadillac with one of the girls from church. We're laughing it up, got the rock and roll cranked up loud, and I guess I just took my eyes off the road or something, because all of a sudden we hit something, a bump in the road. I stopped the car thinking I might have damaged my dad's Cadillac, but then I looked back, and there's a boy in the road, a little boy. I'd run right over him. Oh no, his name was Jimmy Summerfield, the son of one of my father's friends. He was only 3. When I ran over to him, I could see my car marks right there across his chest. He was breathing, but barely. We rushed him to the hospital, and I knew that if he died that night, I'd never forgive myself. Oh my goodness, what happened at the hospital? Well, the doctor saved him. Little Jimmy, he's just fine today, but that night changed my life forever. I knew that God had worked a miracle right there in that hospital. I knew I couldn't control my own destiny anymore. My future was entirely in the hands of God, and so I surrendered myself to him. You're right, Jim, that was a true miracle. Praise Jesus. So God opened up my eyes that night, Tammy, and he brought me here. And you want to know why? I think so I could meet the prettiest girl in the world. Bakker stops walking and reaches for Tammy's hand. She takes it. Tammy, would you kiss me? I've never kissed a boy on a first date. But as Jim looks deeply into Tammy's eyes, she can feel herself lean forward until her lips are on his. They stand there together like that for several moments before Tammy pulls away. They continue walking, hand in hand toward Tammy's dorm, and Jim talks about his dream for the future. He says he wants to become a famous preacher one day, traveling the world and spreading the gospel. He says that he hopes that Tammy will be by his side when he does, and Tammy's starting to hope so too. After their first date, Jim Bakker and Tammy Faye Lavalley's relationship moves fast. On their second date, Jim asks Tammy to go steady. On their third date, he proposes. And on April 1st, 1961, they get married. Jim is 21 and Tammy 19. It's against policy at North Central Bible College for students to marry during the school year. So after saying their vows, Jim and Tammy drop out and start looking towards the future. Jim has a very clear vision of what that future should be. He wants to become a traveling evangelist, and he wants to be on TV. So the Bakkers strike out from Minnesota and travel from church to church across the U.S. To make their sermons fun for the whole family, they decide to start using hand puppets in their show, which turns out to be a huge success. The puppets make the Bakkers celebrities across the Bible Belt and attract the attention of someone with the power to make their dreams come true. Pat Robertson is one of the country's most influential evangelicals and an aspiring media mogul. When he hears about the Bakkers' Christian puppet show, he realizes they could make the perfect addition to CBN, his new Christian broadcasting network based in Portsmouth, Virginia. So Robertson offers the Bakkers a slot in his lineup, and the Jim and Tammy show quickly becomes the network's biggest hit, with songs, stories, and colorful characters that win the Bakkers a large, devoted audience. Before long, the Jim and Tammy show puppet Zippy the Mailbox is receiving thousands of fan letters from kids every week. But on one night in November 1965, Jim Bakker discovers that he has a special talent for getting his audience to send more than just fan mail. That evening, Jim is on air live for CBN's annual telethon. Christian television still doesn't run commercials, so it relies on viewer donations to stay in business. Usually, Bakker feels right at home in front of the cameras, but right now he's struggling because it's the last night of the telethon and they're still $40,000 short of Pat Robertson's goal. Bakker's eyes dart around the TV studio, taking it all in. The cameras, the lights, the golden curtains, his big wood-paneled desk. Hosting a successful television show has made him feel like a real celebrity, and he loves it. But if he lets down Robertson tonight, all of this could go away. He needs to motivate people to make more donations and fast. Entertainment alone isn't going to do it. He needs to speak to their hearts. So ignoring the cue cards, Bakker looks directly into the nearest camera and says that he hasn't wanted to tell anyone this, but actually the network is on the verge of bankruptcy. This telethon was the station's last hope. If it can't generate $40,000 within the next few hours, then CBN will be forced to leave the airwaves. No more Pat Robertson, no more Jim and Tammy, no more Zippy the Mailbox. Bakker stops for a moment. What he just said wasn't exactly true. CBN isn't on the verge of bankruptcy, and God wouldn't want him to lie. But CBN does need the money, and surely God must have been the one that gave Bakker the idea to exaggerate in the first place. Suddenly, Bakker hears a phone ring toward the rear of the studio, where CBN employees take donation pledges. Then another phone rings, and another. Bakker realizes his plea is working. People are calling in to donate, and Bakker wants more of them. So he clears his throat and then blinks a few times. He pictures himself having to give up this TV studio, his nice suit, his car. All of these things could be taken away from him if CBN really were to go out of business. Bakker's eyes begin to sting. He could wipe them, but doesn't. Instead, he lets tears fall, because it's okay for the viewers at home to see him weep, to see how badly CBN needs this money. 3 more phones begin ringing at the same time. Then 4 more ring after that. The volunteers excitedly thank the callers for their generous donations. Bakker smiles through his tears. Only 3 hours later, CBN has exceeded its fundraising goals, with Bakker raising $105,000 in one night. Finally, at 2:30 a.m., Bakker signs off, feeling like God just handed him another miracle and a strategy for the future. Over the next 6 years, Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker's fame only skyrockets. They launch a second show called The 700 Club. It's a Christian variety show featuring interviews, music, and Bible study, all hosted by Jim Bakker and featuring Tammy Faye's musical performances. Jim and Tammy also cut an album of songs and stories. They hawk merchandise to the kids that attend their tapings, and Jim continues to cultivate his talent for raising money. And with the cash rolling in, the Bakkers begin to upgrade their lifestyle. A mink coat for Tammy, a new Cadillac for Jim, and a waterfront home in one of Virginia's nicest neighborhoods. By 1972, the Bakkers are riding higher than ever. But back at the network, all of their personal success is beginning to rub people the wrong way. They're not sharing the profits from their merchandise, and the spending for their shows has gotten out of hand. To get the network's finances under control, Pat Robertson hires a man named Jerry Horstman to manage the network's productions and curb its expenses, starting with those of the big stars Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker. But when word of this reaches Jim, he's furious. One day in early 1972, Horstman is sitting behind his desk, studying balance sheets when Bakker marches into his office with a scowl. Jim says he's just heard that he'll no longer be getting some of the benefits he's used to, and he wants an explanation. Horstman explains that he discovered that between the 700 Club and the Jim and Tammy Show, the Bakkers are taking up too much of the network's production budget. 1 of every $5 CBN spends goes to the Jim and Tammy Show alone, an unsustainable amount. Horstman then looked at the Bakkers' pay and saw that they earned around $300 a week, plus a housing allowance of $200 a month. Bakker says that he doesn't see a problem, especially with the ratings he gets for CBN. And Horstman shrugs and says actually he agrees with that. He isn't troubled by the Bakkers' salary. What troubles him are the perks. Horstman counts them off on his fingers. CBN pays for Tammy to get her hair done at a salon every week. CBN pays overtime to one of its secretaries to babysit the Bakkers' 2-year-old daughter, Tammy Sue, and even their dogs, Tweety and Beefy. CBN paid for the suit they're wearing now with the clothing allowance they enjoy. This, Horstman explains, is the kind of spending that must be scaled back. Bakker is entitled to a decent salary and a reasonable budget for his shows, but all the additional expenses are costing CBN so much that no amount of tearful fundraising is going to be able to pay for it. Bakker's eye twitches. He tells Horstman that he and Tammy Faye deserve every last thing they get. They're CBN's biggest stars, and in many ways, they're the reason the network even exists. The reason Horstman has a job. Again, Horstman shrugs, tells Bakker that all that might be true, but Bakker is not Horstman's boss. Pat Robertson is, and he wants budget cuts. Bakker responds by pointing at the speakerphone on Horstman's desk, telling him to call Robertson right now. Horstman does, and when Robertson answers, Bakker quickly recaps the argument and demands that Robertson set Horstman straight. There's a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, like an exhausted father talking to a naughty child, Robertson says it's Bakker who must be set straight. Robertson values Bakker enormously, but Horstman is right. The perks are too costly. CBN cannot afford them anymore. Robertson says Bakker needs to think about what's good for the network and not just himself. Bakker's eyes narrow and his voice gets tight as he says he understands. And when the call's over, Bakker turns and walks out of Horstman's office without saying another word. Horstman leans back in his chair and sighs. He's grateful for Pat Robertson's support, but he knows that this was just one skirmish of many to come. It's clear that Jim Bakker isn't the type to back down until he gets exactly what he wants, even if he has to bankrupt the network to get it.
There's a lot to say when buying a new home or car, but only one thing to say that can help you protect them. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. And just like that, a State Farm agent will be there to help you choose the coverage you need, no matter where you are in life. When you need coverage options, your State Farm agent is there to help, on the phone or in person. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Sound the gifting panic alarm. We've all been there. You need to find the perfect gift. You have absolutely zero ideas and you don't know where to start. Relax. Now you can use gift mode on Etsy. Gift mode takes the stress out of gifting, so you can find the perfect item for anyone and any occasion. Just answer a few short questions about who you're shopping for and what they like, and gift mode gives you curated gift ideas based on hundreds of personas. Imagine pages of artisan espresso mugs for the coffee connoisseur in your life. Or for the pickleballer, customized paddle covers in every shade imaginable. Etsy's got you covered. Need to find the perfect gift? Don't panic. Try gift mode on Etsy now.
In November 1972, Jim Bakker decides that he's done answering to Pat Robertson. And after 7 years with CBN, he and Tammy Faye leave the network. The couple moves briefly to California, where they launch a new show with a new set of business partners. Praise the Lord is a lot like the 700 Club, mixing preaching with entertainment and fundraising. But soon, Bakker has a falling out with his new business partners, and after just 9 months, the Bakkers cut ties with the California operation and relocate once again, this time to Charlotte, North Carolina. There they begin broadcasting on a religious channel they'll eventually call the PTL television network. The Bakkers' flagship show was called the PTL Club, PTL standing for Praise the Lord, and it rapidly becomes an unprecedented success for Christian TV programming. Launched in 1974, its hip and casual talk show format wins viewers far beyond the Bible Belt. And the show's success is bolstered by the arrival of cable and satellite TV technology, which makes it possible for the Bakkers to expand their reach like never before. With tapings 5 days a week and a broadcast audience of millions, the PTL Club generates about $350,000 in donations every month. For Jim Bakker, the show's success feels like a sign he's on the right path. So in 1975, in conversations with advisors, he lays out a grand vision for building more TV studios and more office space for PTL's growing roster of employees. He says he wants all of it to be housed within a Christian tourist destination called Heritage Village. And in the fall of that same year, PTL's board greenlights $3 million to make Jim's dream a reality. It's a big, ambitious project. And over the next year and a half, it gets even bigger. Jim's vision for Heritage Village expands to include a Christian retirement center, a university, a campground, and a 12-story hotel. But it's unclear how any of this is going to be paid for, and soon some within the company begin to question Jim's judgment. One of those people is Larry Hall, a PTL board member, and he believes the network is doing the work of God, but he's increasingly concerned that Jim's vision is ballooning out of control, and without intervention, Heritage Village could sink the whole company. So in the summer of 1977, Hall intends to have a frank talk with Bakker about finances. Hall finds Jim Bakker in his office in an elegant 3-story mansion on the 25-acre property he bought to house Heritage Village. Behind his desk, Bakker is thumbing through a leather-bound Bible, copying down passages for a sermon. He barely looks up as Hall pulls up a chair. Thanks for seeing me, Jim. I know you're busy. Oh, very busy as always, Larry, but I wouldn't want it any other way, right? You know, some can't stand the sound of construction, but not me. Just listen. Listen to how hard they're working. God made that possible so that his followers all over the world may gather here in fellowship. Wouldn't you agree? Well, actually, that's why I wanted to speak with you today. We've been friends for a long time, Jim, and I believe in PTL. But I feel I need to say some things that you might not want to hear. Bakker puts aside his Bible and looks up frowning. And what things exactly? We can't keep spending like this. What are you talking about? Our ministry's valued at nearly $4 million. That is a lot of money, yes. but it's not enough to fund your plans for Heritage Village and keep the network running. Larry, I'm shocked you'd say such a thing. Are you trying to tell me that you doubt God will provide? Bakker reaches for the Bible again. Let's review what the Lord has to say about your attitude, shall we? Matthew 8:26. Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Jim, I'm fearful that your understanding of the Bible differs from mine. Oh, how so? Scripture makes it clear that Christian leaders should work to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and propagate the word of God. I don't see any of that here. You should be directing the ministry's money toward winning souls for the kingdom of heaven. God has given you the gift of success in television. Use that to broaden PTL's broadcast outreach even further. That's what God tells us to do, and that's what the world needs. It doesn't need another amusement park. Bakker leans back in his chair and steeples his fingers. Paul watches as his face reddens. It's clear to me, Larry, that you seem to have missed God's will in your life. This is very unfortunate. I'll pray for you. Jim, listen to me, please. You're building your dream. It's not God's dream. I am going to build my vision. You can leave now. Paul quietly stands and heads toward the office door with pain rising in his chest. He did his best, but he couldn't get through to Bakker and convince him to turn away from this course, one that could lead PTL to financial ruin. Over the next several months, Larry Hall continues to oppose the construction of Heritage Village, but in the end, Jim Bakker's vision wins. Hall loses his seat on the board, and Bakker forges ahead with his plans. Construction continues on the combination studio, campground, hotel, theme park, and university, now renamed Heritage USA, at a cost of $100 million. The spending impacts PTL so much that the company can no longer afford to pay its staff. Layoffs follow, but not before PTL's board votes to increase Bakker's salary. And Bakker is savvy enough to know that the timing of his raise might rub many in the public the wrong way. So he recommends that the board no longer release financial information to the press, and the board complies. But soon, even bigger issues arise. In 1977, PTL had begun raising money to expand its missionary work internationally. The plan was to establish TV studios in Latin America and South Korea to save souls abroad. But with PTL spending nearly all its money on Heritage USA, the overseas missions go unfunded. Certain that the company is headed for disaster, several of Bakker's top executives resign, including PTL's administrative vice president, Bill Perkins. And then, just 3 months later, in March of 1979, disaster arrives. The Federal Communications Commission, which regulates all television stations, announces that it will open an investigation to determine if PTL has violated federal law. FCC regulators believe PTL may be guilty of improperly diverting more than $300,000 raised for its overseas TV studios to pay other bills. And if the FCC decides PTL did violate the law, they could be subject to heavy fines or even lose their broadcast license. Hearings are scheduled to begin in June of 1979, and initially Bakker isn't terribly concerned. But that feeling changes when he hears that Bill Perkins has agreed to testify. Not only does Perkins know the inner workings of PTL, but since leaving the company, he's been outspoken in his criticism of Bakker. So just days before Perkins is scheduled to testify, Bakker decides he needs to speak to him. Perkins is sitting at home when the phone rings, and when he answers it, the voice on the other end of the line launches into a quote from Scripture. "If thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone." Perkins sighs. He recognizes the voice. It's Jim Bakker, and quoting this particular Bible verse is Bakker's way of saying that if Perkins had problems with Bakker, he should have taken them up directly instead of going to the media. So Perkins replies that he has nothing against Bakker as a brother in Christ, that he's not trying to bring down Bakker's ministry. He's just trying to tell the truth. And as a Christian, he refuses to do anything else. Even though he's not with PTL anymore, he still wants to see it get back on track. And that can only happen if the ministry and Bakker face the facts and correct their financial missteps. The problems with PTL aren't personal. They're based on data, backed up by documents in Perkins' possession. And when Bakker gets agitated, accusing Perkins of trying to play God, threatening to tell the FCC that Perkins stole those documents, Perkins replies that he's not afraid of anything Bakker might say about him. He knows the truth is on his side. For a moment, Bakker goes silent, and Perkins thinks this conversation might be over. But then, with his voice rising, Like he's delivering a sermon. Bakker fears that if the FCC wins, the PTL club might get dropped from TV stations across the country. And if that happens, Perkins himself will be personally responsible for all the souls that will go to hell because PTL couldn't bring them to God. For a moment, Perkins is too stunned to speak. Finally, he says that he refuses to accept that responsibility. If the PTL club gets pulled off the air, it will be Jim Bakker's fault and no one else's. Perkins and others tried to warn him months ago that something like this might happen, but Bakker wouldn't listen. And now the chickens have come home to roost. Perkins hangs up the phone, angry and disappointed. To him, it's clear that Jim Bakker has no ability to see what's truly happening at PTL, and the role Bakker has played in it all. Perkins is certain that Jim Bakker will only continue to spend more money than he has, promise more than he can deliver, and say whatever he has to avoid the consequences that are coming.
At the Coca-Cola Company, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and PepsiCo, our bottles might still look the same, but some of them can be remade in a whole new way, using 100% recycled plastic. New bottles made using no new plastic except the caps and labels. You'll be seeing more of these new bottles in more places, and that's thanks to you, because when we get more bottles back, we can use less new plastic. Learn how our bottles are made to be remade at madetoberemade.org.
After investing billions to light up our network, T-Mobile is America's largest 5G network. Plus, right now, you can switch, keep your phone, and we'll pay it off up to $800. See how you can save on every plan versus Verizon and AT&T at T-Mobile.com/across America.
Up to 4 lines via virtual prepaid card. Allow 15 days. Qualifying unlocked device credit service ported 90-plus days with device and eligible carrier and timely redemption required. Card has no cash access and expires in 6 months.
On November 14, 1979, Jim Bakker appears before an FCC commission for his first day of testimony. The FCC has accused PTL of misappropriating donated missionary funds to pay for its operating costs in the U.S., a violation of federal law. If found guilty, PTL could lose its broadcast license. But when Bakker sits down before the FCC commission, he proves to be a skillful and persuasive witness. He declares that he has nothing to hide and characterizes PTL as an honest, small business grappling with unprecedented success. For Larry Bernstein, the lead attorney for the FCC, questioning Bakker is a frustrating experience. The televangelist is exceptionally good at avoiding straightforward explanations. So as they head into the second day of questioning, Bernstein intends to press him more directly. And as Bernstein smooths his tie, he sizes up Bakker, who sits blinking as if the overhead fluorescent lights are too bright. Looking at Bakker, Bernstein is reminded of a schoolboy on picture day. It's almost like Bakker is deliberately trying to appear childlike and naive. But the fact is, Bakker is a 39-year-old man running a multi-million-dollar corporation that's been violating federal law. So as the day's proceedings begin, Bernstein asks Bakker to describe his leadership style. But he quickly cuts Bakker off, asking him to adjust the microphone so the commission can hear him better. Is that better? You can hear me? I was talking about faith, Mr. Bernstein. Okay, but can we keep the focus on your management style with regards to business, not your religious beliefs? But there's no separating my business and my beliefs. See, I don't think you totally understand faith, Mr. Bernstein. You can't measure faith in dollars and cents. I'm no businessman, I'm a minister. Faith is what motivates us, not fact. I respect your faith, Reverend Bakker, but I'm not sure that your beliefs give you license to raise money, then break promises you made on air about how that money will be spent. You told your audience you were setting up a branch of PTL in South Korea, did you not? Yes, I did. Dr. Reverend Paul Young-gi Cho in Seoul was going to be in charge of our ministry there. Okay, and you also told your audience that you had used their donations to construct a TV studio that was nearly complete, when in fact you had not done so. To this day, there is no functioning PTL television studio in Seoul. Is that correct, Reverend Bakker? Well, and did you not receive a letter from Dr. Cho's office in which he implored you to send the promised funds so he could complete the studio? Okay, but in that same letter, Cho expressed frustration because you had been so slow to send money that you told him months earlier you had already raised. Are you familiar with the letter I'm referring to? Yes. Well, we would like an explanation, sir. You raised the money from your donors for Korea, but then you did not send that money to Korea. Why? Bakker leans over and whispers something to his lawyer, then shifts back to his microphone. He starts to speak, then hesitates, looking distraught. Mr. Bernstein, I'd like to answer your question honestly, but the scriptures are very clear. We are not to call our brother a liar before God. So in my own religious conscience, I can't answer. I'm not asking you to call anyone a liar, Mr. Bakker. Just tell me why you did not use the money you raised for its stated purpose. Because the Korean studio was already built. Dr. Cho had built it himself. Then yes, he wrote me some letter saying he'd need more funds or he'd have to tear the studio down. But the fact is, he didn't really need the money, in my opinion, because the studio was already there. I don't know what else to say. Now I have betrayed a brother. Bernstein raises his eyebrows as he tries to parse Bakker's response. Then before he can ask his next question, Bakker suddenly gasps, bows his head, and sobs. Bernstein gives Bakker some time to regain his composure, but Bakker continues to weep. Finally, Bernstein turns to the judge, who just shakes his head and says the hearing is adjourned for the day. Bakker sits at the table, wailing, as his lawyer pats him on the shoulder. While Jim Bakker is consumed by battles with the FCC, Tammy Faye finds herself growing apart from her husband. After 19 years of marriage, she's beginning to feel ignored and unhappy. So she turns to Gary Paxton for solace. He's a handsome singer, songwriter, and music producer, and a born-again Christian. The two started spending hours together recording music, sometimes all night. And unlike Bakker in recent years, Paxton encourages Tammy and seems to want to help her realize her ambitions as a recording artist. And soon she begins to fall for him. Then one day, Tammy confesses to a friend that she thinks she's in love with Paxton. She even admits to letting him kiss her, though she insists that it hasn't gone farther than that. That friend tells Jim Bakker, and he confronts Tammy, demanding that they go to Christian couples counseling. Tammy agrees, but only because it's her duty as a good Christian wife. She knows she should fight for her marriage, but she's tired of fighting. For years, she's begged Jim to pay more attention to their family. They have 2 kids, and Jim barely seems to notice them. And even when he does, he's often more critical than not. Now, Tammy's just sick of it all. And while she put up with therapy for as long as she has to, eventually she hopes she'll work up the courage to tell Jim what she really wants, a divorce. So in the spring of 1980, Tammy follows Jim into the office of Christian therapist Fred Gross. The room is all white, including the sofa. Jim and Tammy sit across from Gross and 2 other counselors who sit still, waiting for someone to speak first. But words aren't coming to Tammy. At least nothing she feels she can actually say out loud. But Jim finds talking easy. He begins by saying he doesn't understand what he's doing wrong. As far as he knows, he's been the perfect husband. And therapist Fred Gross asks Tammy to respond. Has Jim not been the perfect husband? Tammy says that's not how she's felt. He certainly wasn't so perfect when she hosted the PTL club by herself. Tammy had stepped in to help out while Jim was busy with the FCC hearings. And when he returned, he called her a bad host, said she wasn't good on camera, and worst of all, he said it on live TV. And when Jim frowns, saying he doesn't remember that, Tammy scoffs and says she'll show him the tapes. But he cuts her off, saying if he has any issue with Tammy's TV performance, it's that she wears too much makeup on air. It's just not appropriate for a minister's wife. But the makeup makes Tammy feel beautiful, something that Jim hasn't done in years. Jim raises his voice, asking if that's the reason she had an affair with Gary Paxton. Tammy shouts back that she and Paxton are just friends. She never slept with him. There was no affair. She resisted temptation. And if Jim had spent more time with her instead of his Heritage USA blueprints, she would never have gotten so close to Paxton to begin with. Gross interjects before Jim can respond, saying that both are at fault and both need to change. Jim must make more time for Tammy in his life. He earns plenty of money and is a good provider, but Tammy doesn't need another car or fur coat. She needs her husband. Gross then tells Tammy that she needs to repent. He believes her when she says she did not sleep with Paxton, but that doesn't change the fact that she committed the sin of adultery in her heart. And though these changes won't happen overnight, Gross knows that deep down, the Bakkers still love each other. He asks them to think about the first date they shared in college. They can rekindle that love if they're willing to try. Jim turns to Tammy and nods. And for the first time in what feels like years, Tammy sees his kindness once again. The adoration he showed so many years ago. It's a comforting sight. And Tammy allows herself a slight smile. If Jim can really change, then maybe there is hope for their marriage after all. She takes Jim's hand and squeezes. And in this moment, she does feel like she did back in the early days of the Jim and Tammy show. She and her husband, a team again. Maybe this could be the start of a new chapter in their relationship, one that can withstand any challenge that might threaten to tear them apart. From Wondery, this is episode 1 of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker from American Scandal. In our next episode, Jim Bakker defends himself from a horrifying allegation made by a former employee. And as a reporter starts digging into the story, Bakker's attempts to cover it up puts everything he's built at PTL in jeopardy. Wondery Plus subscribers can binge American Scandal early and ad-free right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy American Scandal, be sure to give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. I read every one of them. I also have 2 other Wondery podcasts you might like, American History Tellers and Business Movers. Follow American Scandal on the Wondery app, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can binge all episodes of American Scandal early and ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Apple Podcasts. And before you go, tell us about yourself by completing a short survey at Wondery.com/survey. And to find out more about me, including my other podcasts, go to NotThatLindsayGraham.com. That's NotThatLindsayGraham.com. If you'd like to learn more about Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, we recommend the books Forgiven by Charles Shepard, PTL by John Wigger, and I Was Wrong by Jim Bakker. This episode contains reenactments and dramatized details. And while in most cases we can't know exactly what was said, all our dramatizations are based on historical research. American Scandal is hosted, edited, and executive produced by me, Lindsay Graham, for Airship. Audio editing by Christian Paraga. Sound design by Gabriel Gould. Music by Lindsay Graham. This episode is written by Hannibal Diaz, edited by Emma Cortland, fact-checking by Alyssa Jung Perry, produced by John Reed, managing producer Olivia Fonte, senior managing producer Ryan Lohr, senior producer Andy Herman, development by Stephanie Jens. Executive producers are Jenny Lauer-Beckman, Marshall Louie, and Aaron O'Flaherty for Wondery.
When the matriarch of a prominent Princeton family is found stabbed to death in her locked basement, investigators look from a serial attacker to her family to Princeton University students. One hot-blooded investigator sees a conspiracy. Is he way off base, or does privilege let you get away with murder? You can listen to In the Shadow of Princeton exclusively and ad-free with Wondery Plus. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or Apple Podcasts.